This is OL Nation. Welcome all Laurentians across generations and around the globe. At OL Nation, our mission is thought leadership, knowledge sharing, and networking. I'm your program host, Rohan Shetty, Vindhya, 1986. And now we have Kalpana Kuttaya, your host, Pankaj, 1980. Welcome, Kalpana.
Thank you, Rohan, and hello, everyone. This session is one that I'm particularly happy to host, as it happens to address my personal professional passion. Learning and working in the field of design and architecture has shaped my thinking and inspired my life in multi-dimensional ways. It's a profession that fuels your interest in culture, the arts, space and place, instills in you curiosity and the desire to explore, teaches you humility, reminds you that your responsibilities to your community, society, and the planet at large, and introduces you to good taste and cool style. Design is also a way of life. It's an attitude how you think, how you want to receive and perceive, how you choose to live your life. It humbles you to learn and have an open mind, even if you are a stubborn person. To get us started on this session titled Deconstructing Design, Different Perspectives, I'm very happy to introduce Paul Mathew, Lucy Philipose, Suzanna Tharian, and Abhimanyu Nohwar as our speakers and guests today. Paul Mathew, Sumeru, 1984, is a staff scientist and department head of whole building systems at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in Berkeley, California. Paul conducts applied research, market transformation activities, and energy use in buildings, including integrated building systems, energy analytics, and energy risk analysis for building valuations. Prior to joining LBNL, he worked at Enron Energy Services and the Center for Building Performance at Carnegie Mellon University. He has authored 150 technical papers, articles, and reports. He received a US Presidential Award for Federal Energy Efficiency. He has a bachelor's in architecture and a PhD in building performance and diagnostics from Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome, Paul. Lucy Philipose, Pankaj, 1986, considers herself as an earthling at home. After completing her Bachelor of Architecture at Manipal Institute of Technology, she went to work with Thakkar & Associates, an architectural firm in Bangalore, where her projects included commercial interiors and offices for brands like Madura Coats, Urban Mills, and Titan Watches. She went back to work in Cochin, where she currently works Solo in Soho, which translates to a small office at home. She has earned great accolades from her clients in the region for giving new life to old buildings that might or might not have had a glorious past. Her areas of design interests include finding solutions for non-standard requirements that are not catered by the modular, mass-produced industry sector, and in training and upscaling the workforce who work on her projects. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you.
Suzanna Tharian DEO, 1989, is a licensed architect based in New York City. She completed her master's from Kansas State University and a bachelor's in architecture from Manipal Institute of Technology. She's presently the principal of Stat Architecture, which she founded in 2012. Susanna started her career working in various New York City firms, initially on healthcare and school projects, which soon turned her focus towards multifamily residential development. Her work is mainly within the affordable housing realm, with her clients and developers, local not-for-profit organizations, and various New York City government agencies. Welcome, Suzanna.
Thank you.
Abhimanyu Nohwar ARA, 1997, is an industrial designer from the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. Over the past 20 years, he has worked across major sectors with a focus on user experience design, industrial design, new product innovation, strategy, policy, and education. He founded and led a multiple award-winning multidisciplinary design studio for 14 years, has written India's policy on design education and Innovation in 2012, and is most recently headed Strategic Design at BCG. He's deeply passionate about helping change mindsets towards openness and empathy for people and the planet, and finding ways to bring positive impact at scale. In his non-work life, Abhimanyu is a keen golfer and photographer and enjoys travel and adventure. Today, we have 4 OL Laurentians who are leaders and entrepreneurs. We now hand over this OL Nation session to them so that they can speak among themselves about the profession they all hold common, which is architecture and design. Thank you all for being on this session.
Thanks so much, Kalpana, for those very warm introductions. So I'll kick it off here with asking my fellow panelists some questions. All designers are molded by their experience. So I'd like to explore how Lovedale shaped you as a designer. Lucy, I'm going to start with you. Were there early indicators during your school days that foretold a future in design for you?
I would think so, Paul. See, I didn't know it about myself then, but I was one of those children with a frightfully short attention span. So if I didn't grab what was going on in class immediately, my mind would just wander. I mean, those whole 700 acres and probably surface at tea time. So that was never good for me. I fared better, I would think, on the sports field, and what I loved with a passion is drawing. That showed up in all my schoolwork. Yeah. So the diagrams would all get done, but the theory was always relative. You know, at school, we all help each other. So sometimes I would help other children do their diagrams if they struggled with it. And I remember once there were these 3 microscopes to draw in the biorecord book. So I took great trouble to give like each of these microscopes a personal signature so that ma'am would not guess that the same muff had drawn all of them. So I think maybe I knew I loved attention to detail. I could have been a master forger, I think. I don't know if my father would support me in that. But see, I turned to art even in times of distress. It was my way of addressing various things in my life. And what distressed me more than anything in school was debates. I know, Paul, you were very good at it, but for me, Sabapati ji and Mitro were no Mitro of mine. But apparently, this is a very common affliction. Imagine that. You know, a public school goer is struck down by public speaking. And of course, there are hundreds of remedies for this solution. But in my case, none of them ever worked. So I took a very unorthodox approach. I tried to bribe my way out of this. Yeah. So Kajali, a senior I was very fond of, she was in charge of debates. I knew she loved horses. I was onto it. So I drew her this magnificent black stallion. Must have galloped away or was not a Hussein, I don't know. But I was sent up to do declaration, and I gave the famed Gettysburg Address. Abraham Lincoln turned in his grave. So that was not for me. But I think the writing on the wall for me was clearly something towards the arts, something towards the creative side. I'm going to leave debates to you, Paul.
That's very nice. Thank you, Lucy, for sharing that, and appreciate your very forthright and honest sharing there. Suzanna, let's go to you. Same question. Are there ways in which your experience at Lovedale shaped you in any way to be where you are today?
I can actually relate to a lot of what Lucy said. I was much more interested in art and sculpture classes, and I don't think I ever studied in my years in Lawrence. I think the backs of all my notebooks were filled with doodles and sketches. And I think I always knew I was headed to a career in architecture design. Anuli Katakam, who's on the OL Nation panel, says she remembers me saying that I wanted to be an architect. But anyway, I think the way Lovedale shaped me in particular was, I think it gave me some resilience as a human being. And I graduated from school, if nothing else, with a sense of humor. And I think not taking myself too seriously has helped me in life. So that's my experience.
Thanks, Suzanna. That's great. Abhi, moving to you. You're an Air Force kid, and you've attended many, many different schools. So how did your experience in Lovedale differ from those other schools, and how did it shape you as a designer?
Right. So Paul, I think Lawrence for me really took the focus off academics, right? It moved it entirely and squarely onto all-round development. which was great because I got to spend a lot of time exploring things like art and music, sculpture. I spent, sports. I spent a lot of time, as much time as I could in the library when I wasn't doing PISA work or I wasn't drawing diagrams for my seniors like Lucy was. Definitely some common ground there. But when I left school after the 9th, I moved to Delhi to finish my high school. And I found that, in the big city, there was a hyper focus on academics. I think I consider myself very lucky that I entered a career in design where the focus is really on a much more holistic and interdisciplinary understanding of the world rather than a very hyper specialized one discipline kind of approach. And I think Lawrence gave me that. It gave me the confidence that a general mastery in a number of things can also stand you in good stead, as opposed to just a hyper focus in academia.
Thank you, Abhi.
Thanks, Abhi.
I think we can all relate to that. So we have within our group people who've taken very different parts in this career of design, even within design and architecture. So I would like to ask Paul a question, and that is, why did you decide to pursue graduate education and a career in energy efficient buildings?
Yeah, thanks, Suzanna. Well, I wish I could say it was very intentional, but it sort of happened organically. As I think we all know, architecture covers a very broad set of disciplines, right? It's everything from the arts to science and engineering. And I found when I was especially in my bachelor's courses, I was much better at the more technical side of architecture. And I was, sort of average on the design side, and I was horrible at sketching. So this is where I should have obviously taken some lessons from Lucy and Suzanna when I was in school, I guess. In fact, I barely passed that class, I think, in architecture school. And I found I was really drawn to sort of these technical functional aspects of buildings, like how to daylight them nicely and how to ensure good natural ventilation. And there's real good creativity there as well, right? It's not just all about form and morphology in architecture. So for my graduate studies, I decided to pursue, a master's and then eventually a PhD in building science. And a lot of my work was focused on creating software tools to allow architects to better analyze the energy use of their buildings. So, although my career has been very much in applied sciences and research, as it were, I've remained very close to the profession. And I, engage with major architectural firms on a regular basis. And one of the things I've really come to appreciate is that good energy efficient sustainable design and aesthetics are completely synergistic. An energy efficient and sustainable design is a beautiful design, in my view. And there are remarkable examples of that all over the world. So anyway, I'll stop there.
No, I think everybody's getting to that point right now. I think you were just there before everybody else. Abhi, you've had a very remarkable career, completely diverse. You've run a design studio, you've taught, you've been a policy advisor to the government of India, and many, many more things. Can you talk a bit about how you got there?
I have dabbled a bit over my career, I do admit. I think looking back, every career transition has come because I've somehow, one way or the other, outgrown the role that I was, performing at that time. So to give you an example, I started out early in my career designing web and software-based solutions for emerging economies, with a focus on India, and the work was fantastic. But even though there was such meaningful work going on, at the end of 2 years at HP Labs, I realized that there was something wrong with this approach. It was like saying that we're going to solve these massively complex problems, whether it's distance learning or, telemedicine for India, but we're going to solve them as long as the solution is a piece of software. And we all know that in India, problems are multidimensional, right? So at the end of 2 years there, I decided to move on, and I moved to Delhi in 2005, and I set up my own design practice. Really as a place to explore a discipline agnostic approach to design, right? So rather than saying that, okay, I'm a trained product designer, so my studio is going to design products, what I did was say that, okay, I'm going to solve all kinds of problems, and I'm going to bring whatever discipline is required, together, whatever skill sets are required to solve those problems. So along the way, I've taught myself a number of adjacent design skills and all kinds of other skills. And I think all of this just came from, a desire to be authentic to what I wanted to solve and, what kind of problems I wanted to solve. What I also found was that this approach kind of untethered me from the shackles of, a narrowly defined role in design. So I was free to, for example, to take time off, from my studio and join the government and work on policy at some point. So it actually freed me to think more widely, in a sense.
That is remarkable. I think you've had quite an, wide arc of experience. So Lucy, my master's was in restoring old buildings for contemporary uses. And I know that you have done a lot of work in that field. Can you talk about what sparked your interest in that?
So very early in my practice, I had a young client who came to me with the requirement of building a new home. But she also had an added quandary. She had recently tragically lost her parents and inherited her grandfather's house, which she thought of as kind of dilapidated, but that brought on an extra responsibility which she could not handle and wanted me to help her out with it. So we thought, why not? Let's go have a look at this house. And it was beautiful. Yeah. To me, all the requirements that she had earlier mentioned to me was very soon wrapping around in this. But when I suggested it to her, she was a bit ambivalent. And I told her, let me just dream up something for you. I'm sure you'll warm to it slowly. As we were leaving the building, something caught my attention. It was like a broken swing set lying in the corner of the garden. And I was most curious to take a look at it. As we went towards it, she told me, we spent so many childhood days on it. It's what we call a love seat. I was thinking, well, if you climbed on this now, you'd surely fall head over heels. Anyway, I asked her if I could do something with it. And she said, why not give it a go? I took all the beautiful parts out of it. And knowing that she was a new mother with a little baby at home, I made it into a baby's cot. And she absolutely loved it. She would call me every once in a while and tell me that it brought her so much comfort. She it helped her connect with her parents, her childhood. And it really helped her out. I could see the change in her as a person. Like the sadness left the edges of her eyes and all of it. But what had I really done? I'd just taken something that was already beautiful, given it meaning and function. But that for me was the light bulb moment, seeing the change in her, how much it transformed her, more than the baby's cot. So I knew I was onto something then. Yeah. And with that, she warmed to the idea of moving into her grandfather's house and let me in fully, wholeheartedly. That also started my romance with kitchens and toilets, which has stuck with me forever after that. It's done me well, and I'll very happily say, I love to work on toilets. I even married a John. Sparks have been flying ever since.
That's great.
But Suzanna, let me tell you, Billy Joel is my favorite singer, and I know most of his lyrics. I would like to ask you, what was this journey that you set out? How did you get to where you are, this New York state of mind?
So unlike most of you, I think my career path has been fairly linear. So I did my bachelor's in India, my master's in the US, and then I moved to New York to find a job. I think I just fell in love with the city. It was an instant romance. And I think within that first year, I tried a few jobs, and then I landed on the job that I was in for the next 15 years. It was there that I got my license, and I got my experience in multifamily housing and got my hands dirty in different aspects of the profession. So that experience also helped me when I started my own practice 10 years ago. So right now I have my own practice in the city, and I think I am doing exactly what I set out to do, though I don't think I knew it at any point coming here that I was headed this way. So it feels right. It was probably a subconscious and active process, but here I am.
Way to go, uptown girl.
Yeah.
Lovely journey. But as far as journeys go, like our drive up to school, we have the scenic part, and every once in a while we hit that pothole. So I want to ask you, Paul, reading your bio, I felt like there's so much research in it, so much of data crunching, all of that. What do you find rewarding about the work that you do? And on the flip side, do you have any struggles?
Yeah, well, can certainly start with struggles, but let's start with the reward part. I think far and away, the most rewarding aspect of my work is that it directly addresses climate change, which in my view is the existential crisis of our time. So, because if we don't address that effectively, we're all toast, literally burnt toast, right? And energy use in buildings is, a huge part of that problem. Buildings consume 40% or create 40% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the United States and globally as well. And that's not even accounting for the energy that goes into producing the materials and construction and so on and so forth. So just operating buildings more efficiently is a core strategy to kind of reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And it's one of the most cost-effective solutions we actually have. I mean, this is actually pretty easy to do. So I think that's clearly probably the most rewarding aspect of my work. In terms of struggles, gosh, if there was one thing I would pick, it would be the imposter syndrome. And I know many people face this, regardless of what you've accomplished. I think the thing with architecture is that it covers so many disciplines, and I'm trained as an architect. But my job right now is as a scientist, but I'm not a scientist in the traditional sense of the word, test tubes and Bunsen burners and things like that. And I'm trained as an architect, but I'm not really doing design the way Suzanna, for example, is, or Lucy, you are, right? So, I've had to, it's always this question of well, what are you really? And, are you trying to forge your own path? So one advice I give myself, and which I like to give others as well, who also struggle with the same issue, is that, my favorite quote on this is from Oscar Wilde, who said, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." So I'll say that.
Oh, that was marvelous, Paul. Listening to you, I promise you, I'm working hard on reducing my carbon footprint. Yeah. Good. See, 50 shades of gray on my head.
Right.
Okay. Anyway, the Lovedale teaches us, rather I would say, gives us the opportunity to be the jack of all trades. But you, Abhi, you've aced many of them. I can barely call out all your accomplishments, the many feathers in your cap. But I'm most fascinated to hear about your design innovation policy. Could you tell us what makes a designer innovative?
Good question. Let me try to answer that with a quick story, right? So about my work with the government. In retrospect, it was, it turned out to be a bit of a David and Goliath story, which was completely unintentional. What happened was in early 2012, the government reached out to me saying, can you, share with us your vision of what the future of design education needs to be for the country? And that's it. That's all the context I was given. So I wrote up a one-pager with a few of my thoughts. And they asked me to come and attend a meeting at the Planning Commission. And I showed up on a happy Monday. And to my horror, I entered this massive conference room where there were 30 other teams of designers, 30 of them from all across the world that the government had been engaging with for almost a year, right? And each of them had these 200-page documents that they were presenting. And the presentation started from my left at 9 in the morning, went all the way around the table. And, it was my turn by around 5:30 in the evening. But at that point, when it was finally my turn to stand up and speak, I'd noticed a pattern. I'd noticed that everybody was essentially presenting variations on the same theme. They were saying that, okay, you give us this much money and this much land in this location, and we will create a design school and with these programs, and we will cater to, say, 500 or 5,000 students and something in between. And that was it. There was no thinking beyond that. And that gave me the confidence to, stand up with this sheet of paper and share my 3 thoughts. And what I wanted to say was, I shared with them that, okay, it would be a mistake to create another brick and mortar institution in a country like India, because we have a serious problem, with shortage of resources and numbers of people that need them. So what we need to do urgently is to create an open design school that will cater to, anybody, and, it'll essentially share learning material on design freely online. The second aspect was, the creation of a national design innovation network, which would connect the general public to change makers, right? So design students from other academic disciplines, to the industry, to social organizations, and to the government. So what this does is essentially it creates a social network for collaborative problem solving. So people can, don't have to wait for the government to come and solve their problems. And the third aspect that I proposed was the creation of design innovation centers that were specialized schools of design, research, and practice that were embedded in non-design educational institutions, right? So you could think about, for example, an agriculture college having a design innovation center. So now they would have the ability to create their own agricultural tools and machinery, or say an AIMS or a medical college would now be able to create their own prosthetics or their own medical devices. And as it turns out, Sam Pitroda, who was heading the National Innovation Council at the time, he just conferred with his colleague for about a minute, and then right there in front of everyone asked me to join and turn my proposal into policy. And that's what I did over the next 6 months. So what I found at the end of this entire engagement was one, of course, it did, it made it into the 12th five-year plan. But I'm also very happy to share that the policy is very strongly in effect, even with the change of government. They've just kind of rebranded it. They haven't changed a word, and they are busy implementing it. It's called the National Initiative on Design Innovation. And since 2013, 20 design innovation centers have already been built in the country, with 64 spoke institutions that each of these are supporting. And they've been housed within institutions like IITs and School of Planning and Architecture and others. And several startups have already emerged from this. Lots and lots of patents have been filed, and the impact is very real. And this is just the beginning. So what looking back, what I see is that what was innovative about my approach, as opposed to these various design teams, was that I actually worked beyond the brief, right? All of them were meeting the brief, and I had no skin in the game. So all I was trying to do was help the client to see the possibilities that they weren't imagining already. So I think as part of a designer's role, that's what I would call being innovative.
That is so impressive, Abhi. I would really, in future, like to touch base and work in one of your innovation hubs if that were possible. Yeah. I would like to ask you, Suzanna, were there, on this path of yours, what were your challenges and what did you find exciting?
So it's always very hard to follow Abhi. But I can totally relate to what Paul said about the imposter syndrome. I think I suffered with it for most of my career. But the question was what I find most rewarding. So in my practice, I think we are involved with all aspects of the design process. So whether it's a client who comes to us and says, what can you build on a particular site? We have this site, so we run zoning analyses with them. We come up with a schematic design. We then work with engineers to develop construction documents. All this is very normal architecture stuff. And then we go through the whole construction process, see the project till completion. So what I find very fulfilling is seeing an idea happen and then taking it to fruition. That has been the most rewarding part of it. The biggest challenge has been hiring people, managing people, all of that. So I it reminds me all the time that my skills are in architecture and that I don't have an MBA. But having said that, despite all the challenges and the ongoing learning process, I don't have any regrets. It's an ongoing learning process.
Oh,
yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing, Suzanna.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to give the floor back to you.
Thank you. So we've all talked about all our work in different aspects, and I know the work is always evolving as well. So first question again to Paul. How has sustainable design evolved in the course of your career, and where do you see it heading?
Yeah, thanks. I think the most significant change that I've seen over the course of the last 25, 30 years is that it's gone from being sort of a fringy thing to being pretty much mainstream. Still not completely widespread, but it's really mainstream. Just to give you a little vignette of this, back when I started, 30 years ago, when I first arrived here in the US and started going to some conferences on sustainable design, it mostly had a lot of the tree hugger hippie types, a lot of sandals and beads and things like that. Now you go to a conference, it's all suits. It's major corporations, it's big business. And I think that's good. I mean, we need that in order to really kind of scale sustainable design. Likewise in education, when I came for grad school, you can count on one hand the number of programs that had sustainable design, and the opportunity to sort of major in sustainable design. Today, there's not an architecture school in the country that that's worth salt that doesn't have a program in sustainable design. Finally, what's also interesting now is in the policy front is the legislation that's happening around this. In the city I live in, Berkeley, for example, about 2 years ago, passed a law that says that no more natural gas or fossil fuels can be used in any new construction. It has to be all electric because already our electricity is 100% renewable energy in Berkeley. New York City passed a law requiring all buildings have to meet certain energy efficiency and greenhouse gas targets and so on. So that's coming, and that's a growing trend, and it's really this mainstreaming of sustainable design practices.
Yep. Where there's money, there's suits. Yeah. So Abhi, you've talked about industrial design as being a mother discipline. How has it enabled you to take on diverse design challenges, for example?
Okay. So I think as with any design discipline, a strong foundation will allow you to work in adjacent design fields, right? But I think in my experience with industrial design in particular, you get a core training in materials and processes, which allows you to work on physical products, spaces of all types. You also get deep training in design research and in systems thinking. And put together all of these skill sets, they allow you to do a variety of work. So let's make it real. Let's take a look at the iPhone, for example, right? So the iPhone is a physical product. It needs product design, but it also runs software, right? So it needs digital design. Now, it needs to be sold not just online, but also through stores. So you need to design the spaces, the flow of people through those spaces, and so on and so forth. But also the iPhone, very importantly, has an app store, right? Which is an entire ecosystem of products and services that just add tremendous value to the iPhone as a product. And that is strategy. So this is what design does. And industrial design allows me to work across this entire spectrum.
Wow, I would have never heard of it that way. But yes, you made a case for industrial design. Lucy, what are the challenges that you would like to see as a means towards responsible design?
See, if you could hover over the earth looking down, you will see in terms of construction, you see a whole lot of buildings coming up on one side, radical bridges, beautiful constructs. And then you also see buildings crumbling on one side. These buildings have no life. They're either coming up or coming down. And then they have all the living forms, buildings where life is thriving, throbbing. I'm talking about somewhere in between all of this, lie certain buildings which are ignored, marginalized, because they served a function for some time, and then I think probably lost their purpose. But they're still full of potential, materials especially. Yeah. These buildings have no soul in them. No one's turned around and looked at them. It's like the lights were put off and the plug was pulled. So I would like to revitalize these buildings before moving on and building something new. Yeah? I see a lot of potential in those type of buildings. See, CGH Earth has done a brilliant job with these type of buildings. Many of their hotels are reconstructs of glorious old buildings, and they've taken it to like world-class quality. So my passion is really to work on those type of buildings, and I've had a lot of opportunity doing that. To just show you the magic of how much revitalizing does to a building, I would like to show you some images. So if you look at this building, the first thing that I did was remove the add-on, which is this porch, this concrete porch. And this is how it looks. This house actually overlooks a river. And so now you could view the river directly. So this is the inside of that very same hall that you saw. All of that wood that you see on the floor is solid 1¼ inch thick teak wood, all of which we have repurposed. And you also see that this hall is a little low on light because the ceiling is dark. So what we did was, let there be light. So you can see all the old flooring has come back as a dark wood floor. What I want to say is 90% of the material that you see here is all from the old building itself. Yeah? And just bringing in light has revitalized this whole space and drawn the family back to spending time out there. But just look at the beautiful wooden floor. Doesn't it remind you of Large Hall? I was thinking, if I could just throw some powder onto this floor, we could start the school dance. So would anyone care to dance to my tune?
Thanks, Lucy. That's incredible work. But also I realized that you've never had to polish the floors of Large Hall before a dance, like many of us 9th graders have. And on that note, let's explore some crazy and fun aspects of our design careers. So, Paul, what's the most unusual experience you've had in your career?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think I would say that probably the most unusual experience for me was working for Enron, Energy Services. It's not like, most people seek for their 15 minutes of fame. I was seeking that. It just ended up on the infamous side instead of actually being famous. But seriously, it was a fascinating experience. I went from this academic environment at Carnegie Mellon to this hyper corporate environment in Houston, Texas. And Enron, like most corporations, their number one goal is to, make money and maximize profit, right? But what was really cool about it was that they were looking to make money doing energy efficiency. And that really taught me an important lesson about how, at least in a market economy, ultimately to scale anything, you need to create profitable business models. And I think, frankly, it's the only way to really scale up in most places. Of course, the other interesting and sort of now I call it fun, but then it wasn't so much, was actually getting laid off in the process of the bankruptcy. And I think I'll leave with this one little vignette that I had over there. It was right as the death spiral was happening. The stock price was going down, 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 down. And then we had these big TV monitors at work, which was always tuned to the business channels. And there was a live reporting of Enron's about to go bankrupt, and the reporter was reporting from right outside the building, and I could just look out the window and I could actually see the reporter right there reporting and, seeing on my screen about how this death spiral. Needless to say, it was kind of really hard to focus on work that day. But all in all, it was a great experience, and I think I learned a lot while I was there. So I'll end there.
Well, thanks, Paul. I don't know if there's too many people who can put Enron and architecture and sustainability in the same sentence, but you managed beautifully. Right. All right. So, Suzanna, moving on to you. Do you have any projects that are important to you, that you can talk about?
Actually, yes. Early in my career, when I had just started, about a year into my practice, I met with somebody who told me, he was probably a prospective client, but he said, I have this particular site that I've acquired, and I'd like you to run a zoning analysis on it, but the project is probably a little too big for somebody like you, which is, let's just say that my practice wasn't big enough to take on a project like that. So I ran some zoning analyses for him, and he was very happy. And then he said, okay, I think we have something here. Can you do a schematic design that we can present to the city? So I made a design, we presented it to the city. They came back and they said they liked it. They just wanted a few modifications. So over the course of several months, I went through refining a design. And before I knew it, I was the architect for an 89-unit, 10-story building. So that was a big coup for me so early in my career. And that building has now been built and fully occupied. But it's also in a particular area of Harlem where I have other projects. So I constantly pass by that building, and it's become this big, standing, hulking resume for the practice. So that was a very exciting process. Yeah.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing that story, Suzanna. I think all architects dream of leaving their mark on a city skyline, and you've done that. And early in your career, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Lucy, what was your most memorable site visit?
Okay. So imagine that you're watching a concert. You're in the box seat. And while this concert is going on, imagine that there's a shadow play on stage. That doesn't take away from your enjoyment of the concert. In fact, it enhances it or draws you in. Imagine that. That is what I saw at site. So this was over erecting a massive timber roof for a building. This roof had to go up some 24 feet high. So we engaged specialists in this, which are temple carpenters. Whole year round, they work on maintaining the roofs of temples. So these carpenters, what they do is they line all the rafters on the floor in exactly the formation that it would go up in. They wait till the sun is high up in the sky because they use a shadow as a communication technique. Once all of this is lined up and there are ropes and ladders attached to various ends, they get into position and they start singing. It is through song. After this, there is absolutely no verbal communication between them. It is through song and through watching the shadow of these beams going up that they get this mass roof structure up. Yeah? So it looks something like this. It's all flat on the floor. And then they start singing and you can see this thing going up like that. Yeah? And in a little while, there's like a snapshot, and then you can see the roof moving closer together. After that, the singing starts and it moves higher, it moves closer together. It moves higher, it moves closer together. But of course, this is over hours. And finally, this whole thing just magically locks into place. And when you look down, you will see something that looks like an intricate web. So that for me was so mesmerizing. It's a day I will never ever forget. In fact, I would say it's one for everyone's architectural bucket list.
Abhi, I'd like to ask you a question, if I may, on the same count. Speaking of fun, interesting things, have you ever had a moment of sort of where it was design serendipity, let's call it that, where something just came together in a way that you never quite anticipated?
I have actually. So back in 2013, I was, just doodling, and I just came up with this idea of a rocking stool for children. Where kids could just, either straddle it like a horse, or they could sit on either side and use it as a seesaw. And I thought it was kind of cool, but I did nothing with it until 2017, when I submitted it to the Godrej Design Lab, competition. It was a design contest, and I actually got, to my surprise, I got selected. And now suddenly I had to do something with that idea. So as I started to work on the design and I started to do research around it, I discovered that the rocking motion of, a rocking stool actually triggers the release of endorphins in your brain, which is actually very beneficial to children with autism because it helps them to self-regulate their condition. What this also means is that if you have, a couple of these in a classroom, then everyone who's sitting on it is expected to be in motion, so you don't stand out, rocking away. And this meant that it became a socially inclusive piece of furniture. I also discovered that there are benefits for adults as well, working at your desk. So two benefits, right? One is that it engages your core because of the constant, rocking motion through the day. So it actually strengthens your core the more you use it. And second, because it doesn't have a backrest, it encourages your spine to enter a neutral S curve, which is the healthy way to be, as opposed to having a backrest on a chair, which encourages a C curve in your spine, which is what leads to a lot of back pain. So this was one of those serendipitous moments where I didn't start out trying to solve a problem. I was just doodling. But by the time I ended, I'd actually, solved two very important problems.
Great. Thanks very much. Wow, what a lovely discussion of just hearing about all these projects. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to our fearless moderator, Kalpana.
Thank you, Paul. Actually, it's been just phenomenal listening to all of you share your journeys, share your experiences, your aha moments, of course. And it's inspiring, for me all the time to hear about design and how design approaches our lives in a daily way. But question that, Paul, I have a question for all of you, actually. But let me start with one for Abhi. It's something that Paul spoke about and something you just described at the last question that he gave to you. Please share your thoughts on the craft of design versus the business of design. How can you either weave the two for us together or distinguish the two for us, either way?
Thanks, Kalpana. So I think looking back, the first couple of years of my career were completely taken over by the craft of design. I was so focused on creating design artifacts, so whether it's designing products or designing, websites or software and so on, that I didn't think beyond that. But it's only in 2005 when I set up my design practice that I realized that I needed to understand the business of design, and I was singularly unprepared and untrained to do so. So I knew I knew a lot about design. I could hold my own and I could do everything there, but I didn't know the first thing about client interactions. I didn't know the first thing about, running a design practice, about things like marketing, business development, or even, how to plan for growth. I had no idea how to go about doing this. In fact, I didn't even know that I needed to take a structured approach to seeking client feedback. I would just throw it open to them and they didn't know how to respond to me. So I used to get really bizarre responses like, can you match this color to this particular object that I have in my home? And things like that. So, and I think I put this down to a sort of a siloed approach to education where, as design students, we were not taught anything about business. And, so over the years, every opportunity I've got to teach students of design, I've actually shared my learnings with them, just in this hope that I'm able to spread that knowledge a little bit more. And also, I think looking ahead, designers do so much more now, right? Outside of just creating design artifacts. We are called upon to work with business teams, with technology teams, on strategy. We are called upon to understand customer behavior, customer psychology, to have a working knowledge of history, of I think economics in some cases, policy. So it's a fairly multidisciplinary, pursuit. And I think it's about time that design education caught up.
Wonderful answer. Thank you. That was a very insightful, thoughtful response. And I really, really appreciate you spelling it out for people who kind of may not necessarily understand design the way the five of us do, for sure. So thank you for that, Abhi. The next question I have is for Lucy, actually. Lucy, you've described very artfully, very beautifully, some of the wonderful work that you have done. So can you give me your thoughts on what you think about design as legacy?
It's short and sweet, Kalpana. I would say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And certainly don't reinvent the wheel. Just throw on a sunroof and add some hubcaps. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a wonderful response to short and sweet, like you said. Thanks, Lucy. Suzanna, my other question is for you, actually. How would you describe design as shelter as something that, how can you convey to us the humaneness of built environments since you work so closely with design as shelter?
Yes. So as you know, a lot of what I do is multifamily housing. A large part of it is affordable housing. And many of our projects are now mixed income housing because it's a better social model than to keep people apart in their income and say that, oh, people who can afford it live there and people who can't afford it live here. So in one building, you have market rate apartments, and sometimes you have tiered income housing, basically. And of course, we build the buildings and then we go away. But then we have our industry events where they come and they tell us that, people come and talk about how important their apartments have been to their lives, and changing their environment has made such a big difference in their lives. From children's education and development and, adults' health. A safe place to live also gives them some dignity. And I think I've really seen that firsthand in my work.
It's wonderful. Actually, it's a very important aspect of our profession. And I'm so impressed with you that you have taken it on, especially in New York City where it requires it so badly. So thank you very much for slowly chipping away at the issue and the problem. And going about slowly chipping away at the issue and the problem, my last question is for Paul. Paul, we all know that the built environment causes such a burden on the planet, on climate, and has caused so much of climate change, has contributed to so much of climate change. Lots is being done to reverse that. But what advice might you give to someone who is going about to start a new construction project of any typology?
Yeah, well, Kalpana, obviously we've got to be selfish and say the number one advice is hire a good architect, right? No, but actually I'm just being half facetious there because I do think, honestly, the most important thing is really getting a good, great team together. Not just architects, but, engineers, consultants, contractors, critical to getting a good sustainable design. And what I mean by a good team is one that actually has a proven track record, not just mumbo jumbo about sustainability, and that can really has the commitment to stay the course and deliver the building, because buildings are it's a large complex endeavor, right? Over multiple years, each design is bespoke in some ways. So it's really about being committed throughout the process. And then I think to the owner themselves, the person who's actually kind of writing the check, as it were. I think it takes a strong commitment from them as well. And I think they need to understand that or what I would tell to them is that, good sustainable design doesn't happen by accident. Design does not happen by accident. It's a very intentional exercise. And remind them that, buildings are long-term investments. They last 50, 100, or hundreds of years, right? And owners need to keep that perspective in mind. I'm reminded of that quote from Winston Churchill that he said about buildings. We shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. And so I think, we need to be mindful of that very long perspective. So I'll end there. And again, thanks so much, Kalpana, for this opportunity to share our perspectives here.
It's been wonderful. And it's been a privilege to have this conversation with each of you who are so distinct in your fields, have contributed so much, and most of all are very insightful. And needless to say, I'm extremely proud to be a Olorential along shoulder to shoulder with all of you. Thank you for willing to come on our show. Thank you for willing to inform OL Nation in the way you all have. May you all go on to do better in your professions, and wishing you all good luck. Thanks so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kalpana.
So thank you, Kuri. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Paul, Lucy, Abhi, and Suzanna, for this really insightful, straight through, well-designed, no hiccups, no glitches, no nothing, except probably for my internet connection. I have just one quick question for you. Where do you guys think we're going with design in India and the subcontinent? Because we talk about people moving up in life, we talk about an aspirational society, but we talk about our cities and our hill towns where a lot of us grew up, and it's quite messy, for want of a better word. So where do you think we're going with design? Are we going in the right direction, or are we going somewhere else? Let's start with Paul.
Gosh, honestly, I haven't practiced at all in India, so I can't speak to too much. All I do is my annual vacation there. So I get a 1-year snapshot, as when I come on my vacations, I guess. And I'll admit I'm a little discouraged. I see a lot of design. The vast majority of design is just this blind mimicking of glass towers and, bay windows in Kerala. Bay windows in Kerala? I mean, please. So I think that it's a little discouraging, but there are glimmers of hope. I mean, there are clearly some architects and engineers who are just doing remarkable projects. I just hope they get to be the majority. I'll leave it at that.
Suzanna?
I have to echo Paul on 2 accounts. One is that my view has been a smaller window, but it's also an act of intention. We talked about this on the panel. And, good design doesn't happen by accident. You need good policy. You need people, you need a strong city council in every area to establish what the tenets are, how you go about building, and, to sort of cap certain projects right at the beginning that don't suit the environment, or, to have certain design parameters. I think that's really important.
Lucy?
Well, I'm very happy to say that the younger my client profile gets and I become auntie, the big change that I see is that they seem to be quite unattached to the physical form as such. There's no longer this, I want to have my own home kind of scenario. They'd like to move, travel around the world, just have a base that they can call home. And I would think home is where the heart is kind of a principle. So I would say, I think we're moving in the right direction. The millennials have it all together. I'm very glad to see that, actually.
Thank you, Aunt Lucy. And finally, Abhimanyu.
So Rohan, over the last 2 decades of practicing in India, I've seen a significant shift, right? So I think initially, I used to have to fight with my clients and invest my own time and resources on design research and strategy. And clients used to be only interested in the design output, which is the artifacts. But there's been a significant shift, and now, there's a lot of maturity in terms of the understanding of design and the role of design and how pivotal it can be to, a brand and a company. And a lot of money is being put behind that. So it's, there's definitely been a massive, 360-degree transformation in the role of design in the Indian market.
Thank you very much. And I think that's all for now. It's a wrap.